"What's this monkey doing in my courtroom?" Judge Morrison's voice echoed through the packed courthouse. The 60-year-old white judge stared down from his bench with pure disgust at the young black man standing below. The courtroom erupted. Lawyers gasped, then smirked. Gallery members burst into shocked laughter. Some covered their mouths in disbelief. The bailiff moved toward Marcus Williams like he was removing trash. Marcus stood frozen in his ill-fitting thrift store suit, 19 years old, every eye in the room looking at him like he was less than human. Judge Morrison leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the moment. "Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice barely steady, "I'm here to represent myself in my federal civil rights case against the city." Morrison's laughter boomed through the courtroom. "Oh, this is precious. The monkey thinks it can practice law." He turned to his court reporter. "Are you getting this?" This will be the joke of the year. Marcus's hands shook with rage, but behind his humiliation burned something that would soon destroy everything Morrison held dear. Have you ever been called less than human? What happened next will leave you speechless. To understand how Marcus Williams ended up in that courtroom being called a monkey, we need to go back 6 months earlier, to a world where brilliance means nothing if you're born in the wrong neighborhood. Marcus lived in Riverside Heights, where broken streetlights cast everything in shadows and sirens wailed through the night like a twisted lullaby. His apartment building had more holes than walls, and the elevator had been broken for 3 years. But on the 4th floor, in a tiny one-bedroom apartment, something extraordinary was happening. Every night after his shift at the warehouse, Marcus would come home to find his mother, Sarah Williams, sitting at their kitchen table surrounded by medical bills. The numbers were always getting bigger. The late notices are always getting redder, and her cough was always getting worse. "Baby, you don't need to worry about these," she would say, quickly shuffling the papers away when Marcus walked in. But he could see the fear in her eyes. The same fear that lived in every poor family when sickness knocked on their door. What Sarah didn't know was that her son was studying. Not just studying, but mastering legal texts that most law students couldn't even understand. While she thought he was just reading at the kitchen table, Marcus was absorbing constitutional law, civil rights precedents, and federal statutes with a photographic memory that would have amazed Harvard professors. 3 years earlier, Marcus had received a letter that changed everything. Harvard Law School, full scholarship, perfect LSAT score. The acceptance letter still sat in his drawer, along with his dream of becoming the lawyer his community desperately needed. But dreams don't pay for chemotherapy. When his mother was diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer, Marcus made a choice that would haunt him forever. He turned down Harvard. He took a job loading trucks for $12 an hour. He became the man of the house at 16 years old. Education can wait, he told himself. Mama can't. For 3 years, Marcus worked 2 jobs: warehouse during the day, security guard at night. Every paycheck went to doctors, treatments, medications that cost more than most people's rent. He studied law books borrowed from the public library, teaching himself what Harvard would have taught him, but learning it in the gaps between survival. Meanwhile, across town in his marble-columned courthouse, Judge Morrison was building a different kind of reputation. For 15 years, he had sat on that bench like a king on his throne, dispensing what he called justice, but what everyone else recognized as systematic racism. The statistics were impossible to ignore. Black defendants in Morrison's courtroom received sentences 30% longer than white defendants for identical crimes. Young black men were denied bail at twice the rate of their white counterparts. And when families tried to file complaints, those complaints mysteriously disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. Morrison didn't hide his prejudice. He celebrated it. In chambers, he would tell racist jokes to his clerks. At judicial conferences, he would complain about urban criminals destroying the fabric of society. And in courtroom after courtroom, he would look down at young black men and see nothing but criminals, thugs, and problems to be eliminated. His former clerk, Janet Rodriguez, later revealed the judge's private comments. "These people breed like animals and think like animals. My job is to cage them before they destroy everything decent people have built." But Morrison had protection, political connections, judges who covered for judges, a system that valued order over justice. The collision between these two worlds, Marcus's desperate brilliance and Morrison's entrenched power, began on a cold Tuesday night in March. Marcus was walking home from his security job at 2 a.m., exhausted from another 18-hour day. His mother's treatment had been delayed again because their insurance company found new reasons to deny coverage. The medical bills were now over $200,000. The apartment was scheduled for eviction in 3 weeks. That's when Officer Bradley pulled him over. "Where are you going, boy?" Marcus showed his work ID, explained he was walking home from his security job. But Officer Bradley saw what he wanted to see: a young black man walking through a nice neighborhood at 2 a.m. "Turn around, hands behind your back." "But officer, I haven't done anything." "I said turn around." The cocaine that Officer Bradley found in Marcus's jacket pocket had never been there before. The arrest report that Officer Bradley filed claimed Marcus was acting suspicious and resisted arrest. The security footage from the store Marcus had just left, which would have proven his innocence, mysteriously disappeared from the police evidence room. 3 days later, Marcus stood in Judge Morrison's courtroom for the first time. Public defenders overwhelmed with cases. Mother was too sick to attend, facing 5 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. That's when Morrison looked at this young black man and decided his fate before hearing a single word of evidence. Guilty. Next case. The gavel fell like a death sentence. Guilty. 5 years. Next case. Marcus stood in that courtroom, watching his life collapse in real time. His public defender, a tired man with coffee stains on his shirt, barely looked up from his notes. The whole trial had lasted exactly 14 minutes. No witnesses called, no evidence examined. Just Judge Morrison's predetermined verdict based on the color of Marcus's skin. But the real nightmare was just beginning. While Marcus sat in county jail waiting for his sentencing hearing, his mother Sarah was at home, alone, dying by degrees. The chemotherapy treatments that had been keeping her cancer at bay were scheduled to continue. But the insurance company had a new policy. They don't cover treatments for the families of convicted felons. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Sarah opened it with shaking hands, reading the words that would seal her fate. Treatment authorization denied. Account suspended pending review. She called the insurance company, her voice barely a whisper from the cancer eating away at her throat. "Please, my son is innocent. This is a mistake. I need my treatment." The customer service representative's voice was cold and mechanical. "Ma'am, your policy clearly states that coverage is void in cases of drug-related convictions. Have a good day." The line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone, then at the bottle of pain pills that weren't strong enough anymore, then at the stack of medical bills that now topped $300,000. Without treatment, the doctors had given her 3 months to live. She never told Marcus. How could she explain that his wrongful conviction had become her death sentence? Meanwhile, Marcus was discovering just how deep the corruption went. Every lawyer he contacted from jail refused to take his case. The story was always the same. "Kid, you're not just fighting the police. You're fighting Judge Morrison. And Morrison has never lost a case he wanted to win. But I have evidence of police misconduct." Evidence has a way of disappearing in Morrison's courtroom. Look, take my advice. Plead guilty, do your time, and hope you survive. One by one, every door slammed shut. The ACLU said they were too busy with higher-profile cases. Private attorneys wanted $50,000 up front. Legal aid clinics told him that fighting a judge was career suicide for any lawyer foolish enough to try. But the most crushing blow came from his own community. At the Riverside Heights Community Center, where Marcus had tutored kids and organized basketball leagues, a meeting was taking place. The room was packed with families who had watched their sons disappear into Morrison's courtroom over the years. Mrs. Johnson, whose son Devin got 10 years for possession, stood up first. "Y'all need to understand something. That boy Marcus, he's done for. Morrison doesn't like our kind, and he especially doesn't like our kind who think they're smart." "But Marcus is innocent," said old Mr. Peterson, who had known Marcus since he was 5 years old. "Innocence doesn't matter in Morrison's court," Mrs. Johnson shot back. "My Devin was innocent too. They are all innocent until Morrison decides they ain't." The room murmured in agreement. These families had learned through brutal experience that fighting Judge Morrison was like fighting gravity. You could struggle all you wanted, but you were still going to fall. "Maybe it's time we stop pretending the system is going to work for us," said Mrs. Davis, whose husband had been sent to prison for 15 years on what everyone knew was planted evidence. "Maybe it's time we tell our kids to just keep their heads down and survive." The meeting ended with a resolution that broke Marcus's heart when he learned about it later. The community would not support any legal challenge against Judge Morrison. It was too dangerous, too hopeless. They were giving up on justice because justice had given up on them first. While Marcus sat in his cell, reading law books by flashlight and preparing his own defense, his mother was getting sicker. The cancer was spreading faster without treatment. Her weight dropped from 140 pounds to 98 pounds in 6 weeks. Her cough became a constant rattle that kept the neighbors awake. But Sarah Williams was a fighter. Every day she dragged herself to the courthouse, trying to visit her son, trying to find someone who would listen to the truth. The guards would make her wait for hours in the freezing waiting room, then tell her that visiting hours were over. "Come back tomorrow, lady. Maybe you'll get lucky." She never got lucky. The stakes became crystal clear when Marcus finally got his hands on the police report from his arrest. Officer Bradley had written that Marcus was known to associate with drug dealers and had been acting suspiciously in a high-crime area. Every word was a lie, but lies become truth when they're written in police reports and stamped by judges. More disturbing was what Marcus discovered about Officer Bradley's record. 17 arrests of young black men in the past 2 years, 15 convictions, all in Morrison's courtroom. All with remarkably similar police reports describing suspicious behavior and recovered narcotics. It was a machine, a systematic operation designed to feed young black men into the prison system like logs into a furnace. And Marcus had become just another piece of fuel. The crushing realization hit him as he sat in his cell at 3 a.m., studying a civil rights textbook he'd borrowed from the prison library. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about every young black man who would stand in Morrison's courtroom after him. This was about a system that had decided their guilt before they were even born. If he didn't fight back, if he just accepted his fate and served his time, the machine would keep running. More families would be destroyed. More mothers would watch their sons disappear. More communities would learn to accept injustice as inevitable. But fighting back meant risking everything. If he lost, which everyone said he would, his sentence could be doubled. His mother would die alone while he rotted in prison for a decade, and his failure would be used as proof that the system worked, that justice was served, that young black men who challenged authority got exactly what they deserved. The weight of that choice pressed down on him like a physical force. In the darkness of his cell, Marcus could hear the sounds of other inmates, men who had been broken by this same system, men who had given up hope, men who had learned to accept that they were less than human. He thought about the community meeting, about neighbors who cared about him but had lost faith in justice. He thought about his mother, fighting cancer without medicine because of his conviction. He thought about Judge Morrison sitting in his marble courthouse, laughing about the monkey he had caged. And in that moment, Marcus Williams made a decision that would change everything. He was going to fight. Not just for himself, but for every person who had been told they didn't matter. Not just for justice, but for the possibility that truth could still triumph over power, even if it killed him. The phone call came at 4:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. Marcus was jolted awake in his cell by the guard's flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Williams, you got an emergency call." Marcus's heart stopped. There was only one person who would call him at this hour. His hands trembled as he picked up the phone in the guard station. "Baby?" His mother's voice was barely a whisper, so weak he could hardly hear her. "Mama, what's wrong?" "I'm at the hospital." "Cancer. It's spread to my liver. They said without treatment." Her words dissolved into a coughing fit that seemed to last forever. Marcus gripped the phone so hard his knuckles went white. "Mama, listen to me. I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to fight this. I'm going to get you the treatment you need." Sarah's laugh was bitter and broken. "Baby, there ain't no fighting this system. You just got to survive it." "No." The word came out harder than Marcus intended. "No, Mama. I'm not going to survive it. I'm going to destroy it." The line went quiet except for his mother's labored breathing. "They want me to disappear, Mama. They want me to accept that I'm nothing, that we're nothing. But they made one mistake." "What's that, baby?" "They gave me time to study." The funeral was held on a gray Thursday morning, with rain falling like tears from a colorless sky. Marcus stood in his prison uniform, handcuffed between two guards, watching them lower his mother into the ground. The cemetery was nearly empty. Just a few neighbors who had known Sarah Williams as a good woman were destroyed by a system that didn't care about good women. Pastor Williams from the community church spoke about Sarah's kindness, her strength, her faith. But Marcus wasn't listening to the pastor. He was making a vow that burned in his chest like fire. "They killed you, Mama," he whispered as the dirt hit the coffin. "They killed you with their indifference, their cruelty, their system that treats us like we're not human. But I swear on your grave I'm going to make them pay. Not just Morrison, not just Bradley. The whole damn system that thinks it can crush people like us." The guards pulled him away before he could finish his goodbye, but his mother had heard enough. Back in his cell, Marcus began the most intense preparation of his life. While other inmates slept, he studied. While they watched television, he researched. While they gave up hope, he built a legal arsenal that would have impressed Harvard law professors. The prison library became his war room. Marcus checked out every legal textbook, every book on constitutional law, every volume of Supreme Court decisions he could find. He filled notebook after notebook with case citations, legal precedents, and constitutional arguments. But Marcus wasn't just learning law. He was learning how to fight a war. He studied famous civil rights cases: Brown versus Board, Miranda versus Arizona, Terry versus Ohio. He memorized the exact wording of the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendments. He learned how previous lawyers had successfully challenged corrupt judges and racist systems. Most importantly, he learned about federal civil rights law, specifically Section 1983, which allows citizens to sue government officials who violate their constitutional rights under color of law. Under color of law. Marcus repeated those words like a prayer. Judge Morrison and Officer Bradley had used their government authority to destroy innocent lives. That made them vulnerable to federal prosecution. 3 months into his preparation, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Professor David Jenkins, a 70-year-old black man with gray hair and kind eyes, sat across from him in the prison visiting room. "Son, I heard about what you're trying to do. I'm a retired law professor from Howard University. I've been fighting cases like yours for 40 years. Marcus leaned forward. "Professor, they killed my mother. The system killed her as surely as if they put a gun to her head." Professor Jenkins nodded slowly. "I know, son. I read about your case, and I'm here to tell you two things. First, what you're planning is the most dangerous thing a young black man can do in this country. You're declaring war on a system that has infinite resources and no conscience. Marcus's jaw set. What's the second thing? The second thing is that you might actually win. Because you have something they don't expect. What's that? A brilliant legal mind, and absolutely nothing left to lose. Professor Jenkins became Marcus's secret weapon. Through letters that were carefully disguised as family correspondence, the old professor began feeding Marcus advanced legal strategies, federal court procedures, and insider knowledge of how to fight judicial corruption. Remember, Professor Jenkins wrote in one letter, judges like Morrison depend on defendants who are scared, unprepared, and alone. They've never faced someone who knows the law better than they do. Marcus's cell transformed into a law office. Legal briefs covered every surface. Constitutional amendments were taped to the walls. Case law was organized in meticulous stacks. His cellmate, a man named Tommy who was serving time for armed robbery, watched in amazement. Man, you really think you can beat the system? Marcus looked up from a Supreme Court decision he was reading. Tommy, the system beats people because they don't know how to fight it. They think it's magic, something they can't understand. But it's not magic. It's just rules. And if you know the rules better than the people who made them, you can beat them at their own game. But you're just one person. So was Rosa Parks. So was Thurgood Marshall. So was every person who ever stood up and said, enough. As Marcus's legal knowledge grew, so did his confidence. He began to see the weaknesses in Morrison's system, the constitutional violations, the procedural errors that could be exploited. More importantly, he began to understand that Morrison's greatest strength, his arrogance, was also his greatest weakness. The judge was so confident in his power, so certain that no young black man could challenge him, that he had become careless. He left evidence of his bias in court transcripts. He made procedural errors because he thought no one was smart enough to catch them. He had created a pattern of constitutional violations that was meticulously documented in public records. 6 months after his mother's death, Marcus filed a motion that shocked everyone. He was requesting to represent himself in a federal civil rights lawsuit against Judge Morrison, Officer Bradley, and the entire city. The motion was 12 pages of perfectly crafted legal language, citing dozens of federal cases and constitutional precedents. It was the work of someone who understood the law at a level that most lawyers never achieve. When the motion reached the federal courthouse, judges and clerks passed it around in amazement. This wasn't the desperate scribbling of an angry prisoner. This was brilliant legal work. Judge Morrison received a copy of the motion at his home on a Friday evening. As he read it, his confident smile slowly faded. For the first time in 15 years, Judge Morrison was afraid. Marcus's federal lawsuit had been assigned to Judge Patricia Carter, a no-nonsense federal judge with a reputation for fairness. Unlike Morrison's marble palace, Judge Carter's courtroom felt like a place where truth actually mattered. But even in federal court, Marcus faced an uphill battle. The city had hired the most expensive law firm in the state, Morrison and Associates, led by District Attorney Robert Morrison, Judge Morrison's own brother. The family business was protecting corruption. Marcus was preparing for his first hearing when something unexpected happened. A woman approached him outside the federal courthouse, looking nervously over her shoulder. "Are you Marcus Williams?" she whispered. Marcus nodded, studying the middle-aged white woman in a court reporter's uniform. "My name is Linda Parker. I've been a court reporter in Judge Morrison's courtroom for 8 years. Her hands were shaking. "I need to tell you something, but not here." They met that evening in the parking garage of an abandoned shopping mall. Linda sat in her car, engine running, ready to flee if necessary. "What I'm about to give you could end my career," she said, pulling out a small digital recorder. "But I can't stay silent anymore." Not after what happened to your mother. Marcus's heart raced. What do you mean? Judge Morrison has been recorded, Marcus. For years I've been secretly recording conversations in his chambers, the things he says about black defendants, about your people. It's worse than you can imagine. She pressed play on the recorder. Judge Morrison's voice filled the car, clear and unmistakable. These animals breed like cockroaches. My job is pest control. Every black thug I send to prison is one less future criminal on the streets. Marcus's hands clenched into fists, but Linda wasn't finished. That was from last month. But there's more, from right after your trial. She fast-forwarded the recording. Morrison's voice again, this time laughing. Did you see that monkey today? Williams? The kid actually thought he could represent himself. I should have given him 10 years just for the entertainment value. These people never learn their place. The blood drained from Marcus's face, but the golden revelation was still coming. Marcus, Judge Morrison didn't just violate your civil rights, he's been taking bribes. Linda pulled out a manila folder filled with photographs and bank statements. These photos show Morrison meeting with Robert Castellanos, the head of the private prison corporation that owns 3 facilities in our district. Every month, Morrison gets an envelope with $20,000 cash. In exchange, he guarantees maximum sentences for non-violent drug offenders. Marcus stared at the evidence in disbelief. Do you have proof of this? Photos, bank deposits, recorded conversations. Morrison has been selling human lives for profit. Your conviction wasn't just racism, Marcus. It was business. The final recording was the smoking gun, Morrison's voice. How many more do you need this quarter, Robert? A second voice, presumably Castellanos. At least 50 more non-violent drug convictions. The shareholders are expecting steady growth. Morrison, consider it done. I'll make sure these monkeys get maximum sentences. Business is good when you're selling chattel. They both laughed on the recording. Linda looked at Marcus with tears in her eyes. I've been collecting this evidence for 2 years, waiting for someone brave enough to use it. Your mother came to see me 3 days before she died. She begged me to help you. She said you were the only hope for justice. Marcus felt his mother's presence in that moment, as if she had reached from beyond the grave to give him the weapon he needed. Why are you risking everything to help me? He asked. Linda's voice was steady now, her fear replaced by determination. Because I have a son your age. And in Morrison's courtroom, the color of your skin determines your future. That's not justice. That's evil. She handed Marcus a flash drive containing copies of everything. Recordings, photos, financial documents, years of evidence that could bring down not just Morrison, but an entire network of corruption. Use this carefully, Marcus. They'll try to kill the messenger, but this evidence is unshakable. Morrison's own voice convicting himself. As Linda drove away into the night, Marcus held the flash drive like it was made of gold. For the first time since his mother's death, he smiled. Judge Morrison had just handed him the keys to his own destruction. Judge Carter's federal courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread through the legal community that a young black man was representing himself against one of the most powerful judges in the state. Lawyers, law students, and reporters filled every seat. Marcus walked in alone, carrying a single briefcase. He wore the same ill-fitting suit from his first appearance before Morrison, but now it felt like armor. Across the aisle sat the city's legal army, 12 attorneys from Morrison and Associates, led by District Attorney Robert Morrison himself. Their table was covered with expensive leather briefcases and the confidence of people who had never lost a case this important. Robert Morrison, a tall man with silver hair identical to his brother's, looked at Marcus with the same contempt. Your Honor, Robert Morrison began, his voice dripping with disdain. I move for immediate dismissal of this frivolous lawsuit. The plaintiff lacks standing, legal training, and any credible evidence. He gestured dismissively toward Marcus. This young man is a convicted felon who believes losing a case equals civil rights violations. His claims are baseless, and his presence here is an insult to legitimate litigants." The gallery murmured. This was exactly what everyone expected, the system protecting itself. Judge Carter, a petite Asian woman with steel in her eyes, looked at Marcus. "Mr. Williams, you're representing yourself in a complex federal case. Are you certain you understand the legal standards?" Marcus stood slowly, feeling every eye in the courtroom. "Your Honor, I understand that this court operates under federal law, not the whims of corrupt officials. I understand the Constitution protects all citizens, and I understand that evidence speaks louder than expensive suits." Robert Morrison scoffed. "Evidence? Your Honor, this young man has nothing but conspiracy theories." Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Your Honor, I present motion exhibits A through J, documenting systematic civil rights violations and violations of Federal Statute 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. He handed Judge Carter the documents. The federal judge's eyebrows rose as she scanned the first page. "Mr. Morrison," Judge Carter said, "your dismissal motion assumes no evidence exists. But I'm looking at a meticulously researched legal brief with substantial documentation." Robert Morrison's confidence flickered. "Your Honor, any defendant can compile grievances." "Your Honor," Marcus interrupted, his voice clear, "I cite Miranda v. Arizona, 384 U.S. 436, Brady v. Maryland, 373 U.S. 83, and Monell v. Department of Social Services, 436 U.S. 658, which holds municipalities liable for constitutional violations committed under official policy." The courtroom fell silent. Every lawyer present recognized those citations. This wasn't desperate pleading. This was sophisticated legal argument. Judge Carter leaned forward. "Mr. Williams, where did you study law?" "I'm self-taught, Your Honor. I've had considerable time to study federal civil rights law while incarcerated for a crime I didn't commit." Robert Morrison jumped up. "Objection!" The plaintiff's conviction was properly obtained. "Mr. Morrison," Judge Carter cut him off, "this isn't your brother's courtroom. You'll speak when I ask you to speak." The insult hit its mark. Robert Morrison's face reddened. Marcus continued, confidence growing. "Your Honor, I present Exhibit A, audio recordings of Judge Morrison making racially inflammatory statements. Exhibit B, financial records showing Judge Morrison receiving payments from private prison corporations. Exhibit C, documented sentencing disparities in Judge Morrison's courtroom." He turned to face Robert Morrison directly. "Mr. Morrison, your dismissal motion assumes corruption is legal if committed by judges. But under 42 U.S.C. 1983, any person who, under color of law, deprives citizens of constitutional rights is liable for damages." Robert Morrison stood again, voice tight with anger. "Your Honor, these allegations require serious proof." "You'll examine evidence during discovery," Judge Carter interrupted. "First, I need Mr. Williams's legal argument." Marcus straightened his shoulders. This was the moment Professor Jenkins had prepared him for. "Your Honor, Monroe v. Pape established that Section 1983 provides remedy against state officials who violate federal rights. Judge Morrison used his authority to systematically deny due process to black defendants. These weren't random acts of prejudice. They were official policy designed to generate profits for private prisons." The gallery was completely silent. Even reporters had stopped writing, transfixed by watching a 19-year-old ex-convict cite federal law with Supreme Court precision. Furthermore, under Pembore v. Cincinnati, municipalities are liable when official policy causes constitutional violations. The city's failure to supervise Judge Morrison despite clear bias constitutes deliberate indifference to citizens' rights. Judge Carter studied the documents, then looked at Robert Morrison. "Counselor, your motion for dismissal is denied. This case has sufficient merit to proceed to discovery." Mr. Williams has presented cognizable claims under federal civil rights law. Robert Morrison's mouth fell open. In 30 years, he had never seen a pro se defendant survive dismissal in federal court. Marcus wasn't finished. Your Honor, I also move for expedited discovery and a preliminary injunction preventing Judge Morrison from hearing criminal cases while this matter is pending. The nuclear bomb had been dropped. Marcus wasn't just seeking damages. He was trying to remove Morrison from the bench entirely. For the first time in decades, the Morrison family machine had met someone who knew how to fight back. The victory in federal court should have felt triumphant, but Marcus knew he had just painted a target on his back. The Morrison family had ruled this city for 3 decades, and they didn't lose gracefully. That night, Marcus returned to the tiny apartment he'd rented with his mother's life insurance money. The neighborhood was still rough, but it was all he could afford. As he climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, he noticed something wrong. His door was slightly ajar. Marcus pushed it open slowly, his heart pounding. The apartment had been ransacked, furniture overturned, books scattered across the floor, legal documents torn and thrown everywhere. But the message was clear from the spray paint on his living room wall. Drop the case or drop dead. His phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? The voice was distorted, mechanical and threatening. You embarrassed some very powerful people today, boy. That was a mistake. Who is this? Someone who knows where you sleep, where you work, where you buy groceries. You've got 24 hours to withdraw your lawsuit or you'll join your mama in the ground. The line went dead. Marcus sat on his overturned couch, surrounded by the wreckage of his life, and for the first time since his mother's death, he felt truly afraid. This wasn't just about legal battles anymore. They were willing to kill him. His hands shook as he called Professor Jenkins. Marcus? What's wrong? Professor, they broke into my apartment. They're threatening to kill me if I don't drop the case. A long pause. Son, I've been fighting this system for 40 years. I've seen what they do to people who get too close to the truth. Maybe it's time to consider a strategic retreat. Marcus felt his world crumbling. You're telling me to quit? I'm telling you to stay alive. Dead martyrs don't change systems, Marcus. Sometimes living to fight another day is the real victory. After the call ended, Marcus stared at the legal brief he'd been working on. Months of research. His mother's death, his own sacrifice. All of it could disappear with one phone call to Judge Carter's office. He thought about the easy path. Drop the case. Disappear. Start over somewhere else. Let the system win, but stay breathing. The next morning brought worse news. Marcus arrived at his warehouse job to find his supervisor waiting with a pink slip. Sorry, Williams. Corporate decision. Nothing personal. But I've never missed a day. I've worked here for 3 years. The supervisor looked away, unable to meet his eyes. Like I said, corporate decision. Walking home unemployed, Marcus felt the weight of isolation. No job, no family. No allies except an old professor who was telling him to surrender. That afternoon, he got an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Johnson from the community center knocked on his damaged door. Marcus? Baby, we heard what happened. Behind her stood a dozen neighbors, people whose sons had been sentenced by Morrison, families who had suffered under the same system that killed his mother. Mrs. Johnson, I appreciate you coming, but... Hush now, she interrupted. We came to tell you something important. We were wrong. The old woman's eyes were fierce with determination. We were scared for so long, we forgot what courage looks like. But watching you in that courtroom, seeing you stand up to them people, you reminded us that we got power too. Mr. Peterson, whose grandson was serving 10 years for a crime everyone knew he didn't commit, stepped forward. Marcus, we took a vote. The whole community. We're behind you now. But the danger... Baby, Mrs. Johnson smiled sadly. We've been in danger our whole lives. The only difference is now we have someone fighting back. Young Keisha Davis, whose father had been destroyed by Morrison's courtroom, held up a manila envelope. We have been collecting our own evidence. Stories, documents, proof of what Morrison did to our families. Every family he destroyed, added Mrs. Washington. Every life he ruined. Every mother who lost her child to his corruption. We remember all of it. Marcus felt tears building in his eyes. But they'll come after you, too. Let them come, Mr. Peterson said firmly. We bowed down too long. Time to stand up. The community had found its courage, but the threats were escalating. That evening, Marcus discovered his car tires slashed and windows smashed. The message was clear. Withdraw the lawsuit or face consequences. Sitting in his destroyed apartment, surrounded by evidence of corruption and threats of violence, Marcus faced the hardest decision of his life: fight and possibly die, or surrender and definitely lose. His mother's voice echoed in his memory. Baby, sometimes you know when to quit. But another voice spoke louder, the voice of every young black man who would face Morrison's courtroom after him. The voice of justice that demanded someone stand up and say, enough. Marcus picked up his phone to call Judge Carter's office. His finger hovered over the dial button. Would he withdraw the case and save his life? Or would he fight and risk everything? The choice would determine not just his fate, but the fate of everyone Morrison would destroy in the future. Marcus put down the phone without making the call. Instead, he spent the night preparing for war. The trial began on a Monday morning that would change everything. Judge Carter's federal courtroom was packed beyond fire code limits. News crews lined the hallway. Civil rights activists had driven from across the state. This wasn't just a lawsuit anymore. It was a reckoning. Marcus walked into the courtroom alone, but he wasn't truly alone. The gallery was filled with faces he recognized. Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Peterson, families from his neighborhood, people who had found their courage. Across the aisle, the Morrison family had assembled their full arsenal. Robert Morrison led a team of 15 lawyers now. Judge Morrison himself sat in the front row, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. This court is now in session, Judge Carter announced. The matter before us is Williams versus Morrison, et al. Mr. Williams, you may call your first witness. Marcus stood, his voice steady. Your Honor, I call Judge Morrison to the stand. A shocked gasp echoed through the courtroom. Calling the man you're suing as your first witness was legal suicide, unless you had something devastating to destroy him with. Judge Morrison walked to the witness stand like a man approaching his execution. His usual arrogance was replaced by barely concealed panic. Judge Morrison, Marcus began, do you recall your first words to me in your courtroom 6 months ago? Robert Morrison shot up. Objection. Relevance? Your Honor, Marcus replied, the plaintiff's treatment in Judge Morrison's courtroom goes directly to the pattern of civil rights violations alleged in this case. Overruled. The witness will answer. Judge Morrison's voice was tight. I don't recall specific words. Marcus smiled coldly. Allow me to refresh your memory. He pressed play on a small recorder. Judge Morrison's voice filled the courtroom, clear and unmistakable. What's this monkey doing in my courtroom? The gallery erupted. Reporters frantically scribbled notes. Judge Morrison's face went white. Judge Morrison, is that your voice? That was taken out of context. Your Honor, I'd like to play Exhibit B. Morrison's recorded voice again. These animals breed like cockroaches. My job is pest control. The courtroom was in chaos now. Judge Carter banged her gavel repeatedly. Order! Marcus continued his assault. Judge Morrison, are you familiar with Castellanos Corporation? I may have heard the name. Your Honor, I present Exhibit C, bank records showing monthly deposits of $20,000 from Castellanos Corporation to Judge Morrison's personal account. He handed the documents to Judge Carter. These deposits correlate directly with increases in prison sentences for nonviolent drug offenders. Robert Morrison was on his feet. Your Honor, this is a fishing expedition. Sit down, Counselor, Judge Carter snapped. Mr. Williams, continue. Marcus turned back to Judge Morrison. Your Honor, I'd like to play one final recording. The courtroom fell silent as Morrison's voice played, How many more do you need this quarter, Robert? A second voice responded, At least 50 more nonviolent drug convictions. Morrison again, Consider it done. I'll make sure these monkeys get maximum sentences. Judge Morrison buried his face in his hands. His corruption was now public record, but Marcus wasn't finished with his demolition. Judge Morrison, you sentenced me to 5 years for a crime I didn't commit. But this was never about justice, was it? This was about filling prison beds for profit. That's not... I was upholding the law. Your Honor, I present Exhibit D, Officer Bradley's arrest reports for the past 2 years. 17 young black men were arrested under identical circumstances, all convicted in Judge Morrison's courtroom, all sentenced to private prisons owned by Castellanos Corporation. Marcus walked closer to the witness stand. You turned human lives into a commodity, Judge Morrison. You sold my people like chattel. I object to this characterization. You called us monkeys and animals on tape. Marcus's voice boomed through the courtroom. You destroyed families for money. You killed my mother. Your Honor, Robert Morrison pleaded. The witness is being badgered. The witness is being exposed, Marcus shot back. Judge Morrison, isn't it true that your systematic targeting of black defendants was motivated by financial incentives from private prison corporations? Judge Morrison's lawyer whispered frantically in his ear, but it was too late. The damage was complete. I invoke my Fifth Amendment rights, Morrison mumbled. Your Honor, Marcus announced. The defense rests. Judge Carter looked down at the broken man on the witness stand. Judge Morrison, based on the evidence presented, I'm ordering an immediate federal investigation into your conduct. Furthermore, I'm issuing a preliminary injunction removing you from all criminal cases pending the outcome of this trial. The gallery exploded in cheers. Morrison family power was crumbling in real time. But Marcus had one final surprise. Your Honor, I'd like to present one additional piece of evidence. He pulled out a document. This is my Harvard Law School transcript. Summa cum laude, Law Review Editor. I graduated 3 years ago with the highest GPA in my class. The courtroom fell silent. Even the reporters stopped writing. I gave up my Harvard law degree to care for my dying mother. I represent myself not because I lack legal training, but because every lawyer in this city was too afraid to challenge this corrupt system. Marcus looked directly at Judge Morrison. You called me a monkey who thought it could practice law. But I'm not just a lawyer, Judge Morrison. I'm a Harvard-trained lawyer with a photographic memory who spent 3 years studying every aspect of your corruption. Judge Morrison's face crumpled completely. The young man he had dismissed as ignorant was actually more qualified than most of the lawyers in the courtroom. Your Honor, Marcus concluded, justice may be blind, but she is not deaf. And today, she heard the truth. 3 weeks later, Judge Carter's courtroom was packed for the verdict. Hope filled the air instead of fear. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table, no longer alone. Professor Jenkins had flown in from Howard University. Mrs. Johnson and the entire community filled the gallery. Prominent civil rights lawyers had come to witness history. Judge Morrison was absent. He had been arrested by federal agents after his testimony, charged with bribery and civil rights violations. His mugshot made every newspaper's front page. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Carter asked. The jury foreman, an elderly black woman who reminded Marcus of his mother, stood with tears in her eyes. We have, Your Honor. In the matter of Williams versus Morrison, how do you find? We find for the plaintiff on all counts. We award Marcus Williams $2.5 million in compensatory damages and $5 million in punitive damages against Judge Morrison personally. The courtroom erupted. Cheers and applause echoed off the walls. Marcus sat stunned as the numbers sank in. $7.5 million. The foreman continued. Furthermore, we find the city liable for systematic civil rights violations and award $10 million to be distributed among all victims of Judge Morrison's corrupt practices. Mrs. Johnson sobbed openly. Mr. Peterson hugged strangers. Families who had lost sons to Morrison's courtroom were finally seeing justice. Judge Carter banged her gavel, smiling. This court accepts the jury's recommendation for comprehensive reform. The city will implement federal oversight of all criminal proceedings and mandatory bias training for all personnel. The system that had crushed so many lives was being dismantled. As the courtroom emptied, Robert Morrison approached Marcus. The arrogant prosecutor who had mocked him now looked defeated. Mr. Williams, I owe you an apology. My brother. What he did was unforgivable. Marcus studied the man who had tried to destroy him. Your apology won't bring back my mother, but maybe it's a start toward preventing this from happening to anyone else's mother. Robert Morrison nodded and walked away, his career in ruins. Outside the courthouse, Marcus faced reporters. He had one statement to make. This victory isn't just mine, he said. This belongs to every person told they didn't matter. Every family destroyed by corruption, every mother who died because the system valued profit over human life. He looked into the cameras. My mother, Sarah Williams, died because insurance companies canceled her treatment when I was wrongfully convicted. She died because a corrupt judge decided her life was worth less than private prison profits. His voice grew stronger. But today, we proved that truth is more powerful than corruption. Today, we proved that justice isn't about skin color or bank accounts. Today, we proved that one person with courage can change the world. The crowd cheered, but Marcus continued. Judge Morrison called me a monkey. He said I was an animal who didn't belong in his courtroom. But intelligence, courage, and righteousness don't depend on anyone's permission. They come from refusing to accept injustice as inevitable. A reporter shouted, "What's next for you?" Marcus smiled, thinking of his mother's dreams. I'm using this money to open a free legal clinic in my neighborhood. I'm going to represent every person who can't afford justice. I'm going to make sure no other family goes through what mine did. He paused, feeling his mother's presence. And I'm going to make sure every young person in my community knows they have power to change their circumstances, that they don't have to accept other people's limitations, that they can be anything they want, regardless of what anyone thinks. As Marcus walked down the courthouse steps, surrounded by his community and bathed in victory, he knew his mother was finally at peace. The system that killed her had been brought to justice. The young man they had dismissed as worthless had become exactly what his mother always knew he could be. A champion for justice, a voice for the voiceless, and proof that courage and intelligence can triumph over any system of oppression. Judge Morrison's laughter had been silenced forever, but Marcus Williams' voice would echo through history. 1 year later, Marcus stood before a gleaming new building in his old neighborhood. The sign read, Sarah Williams Community Legal Aid Center. Inside, young lawyers worked tirelessly, representing families who couldn't afford justice. The waiting room was filled with hope. Mothers whose sons had been wrongfully arrested. Fathers fighting illegal evictions. Young people who refused to accept defeat. Marcus walked through the offices, watching his team work. Each lawyer was someone like him. Brilliant minds from forgotten neighborhoods who chose service over profit. Mr. Williams? A young girl tugged his sleeve. She was maybe 10 years old with bright eyes and braided hair. Yes, sweetheart? My teacher said you beat a bad judge. Is that true? Marcus knelt down. I didn't beat him alone. My community helped me. My mother's memory gave me strength. And I learned that no one can tell you what you're worth except you. The girl smiled. I want to be a lawyer like you. Then study hard, believe in yourself, and never let anyone call you less than you are. That evening, Marcus spoke to a packed auditorium of law students at Harvard. The same school he had left to care for his dying mother now honored him as their most distinguished alumnus. They called me a monkey, he told the audience. They said I didn't belong. But your worth isn't determined by other people's prejudice. Your power isn't limited by other people's fear. The students hung on every word. Some of you will face systems designed to break you. Some will encounter people who see your skin color before your brilliance. But remember, intelligence is colorblind, justice is universal, and courage is contagious. He paused, thinking of his mother. My mother died fighting for her right to live. I lived fighting for my right to be heard. Today, because we refuse to be silenced, hundreds of families have found justice. Marcus looked at the diverse faces, future lawyers, future judges, future champions of justice. The system tried to convince me I was powerless, but power isn't given, it's taken. Justice isn't granted, it's demanded. When you face your Judge Morrison, when someone tries to diminish your worth, will you accept their limitations? Or will you show them the true power of an unstoppable mind? The answer echoed through the hall. We will fight. Marcus smiled, knowing his mother's legacy would live on through every person inspired to demand justice. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters. Because sometimes, one person's courage can change the world.